There is a moment so quiet, so frozen, so unbearably human, that history almost flinches away from it. A woman lies in a cold stone chamber, her breath thin, her fingers stiff from winter, her body wasting under months of forced isolation. Her food is rationed, her servants were dismissed, her letters were intercepted. The fire in her hearth deliberately kept low so her resolve might crumble with the cold. This woman, this abandoned wife, this discarded queen, should have broken. Any other woman would have broken. But Catherine of Aragon, daughter of Isabella of Castile and Ferdinand of Aragon, the last princess of a dynasty carved from war and faith, does not bow, does not yield, does not apologize for a marriage she knows is lawful, or a crown she knows is hers by right.
And here is the part history tries to soften, tries to decorate with romance or pity. Henry VIII did not dare touch her. He could execute Anne Boleyn, he could banish Wolsey, he could behead More. But Catherine was untouchable. Why? Not because Henry loved her, not because the English people adored her, not even because the church defended her. She was untouchable because her blood was royal, truly, indisputably royal, because she was an infanta of Spain, a daughter of the Catholic monarchs, a woman whose nephew ruled half of Europe, because to harm Catherine was to provoke an empire. But before we uncover that truth, before we examine her legal genius, before we walk into the courtroom where she forced Henry to face her, before we understand why she survived where others died, pause with me for a single moment. If this opening already chills you, if Catherine's quiet resistance feels more powerful than any sword Henry ever raised, if you want the story the Tudors tried to bury under 5 centuries of propaganda, like this video, share it, and subscribe to Hidden Crowns. Not for the algorithm, but because the truth we're about to unearth is darker, deeper, and far more extraordinary than the schoolbook version. Now, look at Catherine again. She is freezing. She is ill. She is abandoned by the man she once loved, the man she crossed an ocean to marry, the man she supported through war and famine, the man whose enemies she comforted and whose victories she celebrated. Anne Boleyn had youth, Anne had beauty, Anne had Henry's obsession, but Catherine had something far more dangerous, legitimacy. A legitimacy Henry could not sever with a sword, a legitimacy no annulment could erase, a legitimacy she carried in her bones, in her lineage, in the very blood that made her who she was. This is the part no one talks about, the part hidden behind stories of piety and patience. Catherine did not stand firm because she was religious. She stood firm because she was royal. She was the daughter of Isabella the Catholic, the woman who united Spain, funded Columbus, and drove the Moors from Granada. She was a princess trained for rule, trained for war, trained to protect kingdoms, trained to endure loss without surrender. She knew every political law, every diplomatic angle, every loophole in the treaties that bound England to Spain. And when Henry tried to strip her of the title of queen, Catherine did something that changed everything. She refused to acknowledge the court. She refused to stand when summoned, refused to answer questions, refused to accept judgment from an authority she believed had no right to judge her. Because Henry claimed their marriage had never existed. And if the marriage never existed, she was not his subject. If she was not his subject, English law did not apply to her. This is the truth the Tudor chronicles gloss over, the truth playwrights ignore, the truth propaganda tried to suffocate. Catherine of Aragon didn't simply resist out of love. She resisted because she was Henry's equal, because she outranked him in birth, because the strongest empire in Europe stood behind her name. And the man who had beheaded friends, crushed monasteries, executed wives, and reshaped religion to suit his desire could not lay a finger on her. Catherine survived not because she was obedient, but because she was powerful. To understand why Catherine of Aragon survived Henry VIII, why she endured humiliation, exile, starvation, political isolation, the theft of her title, the loss of her daughter, and the collapse of everything she had built, you must confront a truth England has spent 500 years avoiding. Henry VIII could destroy any woman in England except the woman who was not his subject. He could kill Anne Boleyn. He could execute Catherine Howard. He could discard Anne of Cleves. He could intimidate Jane Seymour. He could terrorize Mary Tudor. But Catherine? Catherine was from Spain, and Henry knew, deep in his marrow, that Spain was the one enemy he could not afford to provoke. But power does not always look like an army. Sometimes power looks like a woman seated on a wooden chair in a cold room, refusing to sign a single sheet of parchment. It began quietly, not with a grand trial, not with an explosion of royal fury, but with a conversation that has almost vanished from the historical record. It is the winter of 1531. The air is sharp, the walls damp, the frost creeping across stone like a living thing. Catherine sits in a stripped-down room at Buckingham Palace, her body thin from illness and stress, her eyes hollow but still burning with royal steel. Into this chamber walks Bishop Cuthbert Tunstall, the Bishop of Durham, a man known for gentleness, reason, and diplomacy. Henry has sent him because Tunstall is the kind of man who can calm storms, not provoke them. The king hopes he can persuade Catherine to accept the annulment. Outside, courtiers whisper that Catherine is breaking. They whisper she has no allies left. They whisper Henry's anger grows more dangerous each day. They whisper Anne Boleyn is triumphant. But inside the room, the moment the bishop bows, everything changes. Catherine is pale, but she is upright, composed, perfectly still, a queen even in exile. He begins with kindness. He speaks of Henry's conscience, his need for a male heir, the anxiety of the kingdom, the instability of succession. He speaks of duty and humility, the virtues of obedience. Catherine listens without interrupting. Her hands are folded. Her breathing is steady. Only her eyes move, following the bishop like a predator waiting for the precise moment to strike. Finally, he says the line Henry desperately wants her to accept. "Your Grace, you must consider obedience to the king. He is your husband and your sovereign." The room grows colder. Catherine lifts her head. Her voice is calm, but it carries a force that makes the bishop straighten involuntarily. "I am the king's wife," she says, "but I am not his subject." And with that one sentence, one clean, unflinching stroke, Catherine reveals the truth Henry has been avoiding for years. If Henry insists their marriage was invalid, then Catherine is not his wife. But if she is not his wife, then she is not English. And if she is not English, Henry VIII has no legal authority over her. She does not owe him obedience. She does not owe him loyalty. She does not fall under English law. She is the daughter of Ferdinand of Aragon and Isabella of Castile. She is an infant of Spain, a child of two monarchies more ancient, more vast, more unified than England has ever been. She is the aunt of Charles V, Holy Roman Emperor, ruler of half of Europe, and perhaps the most powerful man on earth. which means that touching Catherine, imprisoning Catherine, harming Catherine, even forcing Catherine to comply is not simply cruelty. It is an act of international aggression. That is why the bishop withdraws. That is why he cannot answer her. That is why he leaves the room rebuked, as he later writes. Because Catherine has turned the marriage question from a domestic dispute into a diplomatic weapon. Spain did not need to send soldiers. Catherine's bloodline already filled the room. Henry VIII can roar, threaten, demand, command, but he cannot act. Because he knows Catherine is right. Now the real war begins. Henry tries everything a king can try without risking political suicide. He strips Catherine of jewels. He steals her household. He cuts her income. He bans visitors. He isolates her from Mary, the daughter who is her entire world. He moves her from palace to palace, Buckden, Ampthill, Kimbleton, each smaller, colder, more remote. But Catherine has learned from her parents, from a mother who commanded armies, from a father who unified kingdoms, from Spain itself. Power is not noise. Power is endurance. Power is refusing to bow. And Catherine refuses everything. She refuses to call herself Princess Dowager. She refuses to accept Anne Boleyn as queen. She refuses to acknowledge Henry as head of the church. She refuses to testify. She refuses to recant. She refuses to break. When Henry orders her to move, she answers, "You have no authority to command me." When he bans Mary from visiting, she writes, "You cannot take from me that which God made mine." When Cromwell attempts to negotiate, she says, "You seek to tempt me from the path of righteousness." When Henry demands she submit for peace, she answers, "I will not damn my soul for your convenience." Every sentence is a weapon. Not forceful, not screaming, not hysterical, but precise, controlled, rooted in 2 decades as England's queen and a lifetime as Spain's daughter. Henry VIII has never encountered this kind of resistance. Anne challenges him emotionally. Cromwell challenges him strategically. Thomas More challenges him spiritually. But Catherine? Catherine challenges the foundation of his kingship. He cannot control her. He cannot intimidate her. He cannot execute her. Because executing Catherine is not executing a disgraced wife. It is declaring war on the Holy Roman Empire. And Henry, for all his temper, his ego, his cruelty, is not stupid. He knows exactly what Charles V can do. Spain commands the seas. Spain commands the Alps. Spain commands the Italian peninsula. Spain commands the Low Countries. Spain commands armies that could crush England in weeks. Every diplomat knows it. Every ambassador whispers it. Every European court watches Henry's behavior with growing disdain and suspicion. How dare he humiliate a Spanish infanta? How dare he exile the aunt of the emperor? How dare he claim his marriage invalid when the Pope himself had sanctioned it? And then, in 1527, Charles V sacked Rome. The Pope is taken prisoner. Charles becomes the most powerful human being in Christendom. Historians rarely mention this, but at that moment, Henry VIII's fear of Catherine becomes existential, because Catherine now has access to the only authority Henry pretends cannot touch him, the emperor. This is the truth English propaganda buries. Catherine survived because Henry was terrified of what would happen if Spain believed she was endangered. He could starve her. He could isolate her. He could humiliate her. He could destroy her reputation. But he could not kill her, not without burning England. Meanwhile, Catherine uses the only weapons Henry cannot seize: law, diplomacy, the legitimacy of her marriage. She cites the papal dispensation that validated her union with Henry.
She references the treaties signed between England and Spain. She quotes canon law, civil law, dynastic law. She reminds Henry that their marriage was recognized by 2 popes, not 1. She reminds him that she arrived in England not as a bride, but as an alliance. She is not merely a woman fighting for her husband. She is a monarch fighting for her throne. When she walks into Blackfriars Court in 1529, past nobles, diplomats, courtiers, lawyers, and kneels before Henry, her voice does not tremble. "I have been to you a true, humble, and obedient wife," she says. "I take God to witness I have been to you no otherwise." Then she stands, turns, and walks out. Henry calls after her. She does not stop. She does not turn back. Because Catherine knows the truth. Only equals can walk out on kings. This is Catherine's genius, a genius historians rarely credit. She uses Henry's arrogance against him. He believes throwing her from court will weaken her. It strengthens her. He believes stripping her title will break her. It liberates her from English jurisdiction. He believes isolating her will silence her. It gives her martyrdom. The more he mistreats her, the more Europe sides with her. And Catherine knows this. She plays exile like a political symphony. Every letter she writes becomes a diplomatic missile. Every ambassador who visits her reports the same observation. Her dignity is unbroken. Dignity is not a weapon Henry understands, but it is one he cannot defeat. In the final years at Kimbolton, her rooms are freezing, her servants are few, her health declining. But she still dresses as a queen. She still signs her letters to Catherine the Queen. She still prays for Mary. She still refuses to obey Henry. She still refuses to die on his terms. Catherine's strength is not romantic. It is not saintly. It is not meek. It is political. It is ancestral. It is the blood of monarchs who ruled with iron hands long before the Tudors ever existed. Anne Boleyn rose on ambition. Jane Seymour rose in obedience. Catherine Howard rose in beauty. Catherine of Aragon rose on birthright. And that is why she survived. Not because Henry loved her, he abandoned her. Not because England supported her, England grew tired of her. Not because she was fragile, she was forged in fire. She survived because Spain stood behind her, because Charles V stood behind her, because the Pope stood behind her, because international law stood behind her, because her marriage was legally unbreakable, even if Henry emotionally shattered it. Most queens lose power when they lose favor. Catherine lost Henry and gained Europe. Catherine lost the court and gained the world's sympathy. Catherine lost her crown and became untouchable. Power doesn't disappear when a king withdraws it. Sometimes power grows in the spaces he cannot reach. In Catherine's case, her power grew with every injustice Henry inflicted. She is starving, yet she looks regal. She is abandoned, yet she continues to command fear. She is dying, yet Henry cannot erase her existence. And he knows it. The truth is brutal. Catherine of Aragon was the first woman Henry VIII tried to destroy, and the only one he never succeeded in breaking. Because Anne Boleyn died proving how deadly Henry could be, but Catherine lived, proving there were limits even he could not cross. In the final winter of her life, Catherine of Aragon lay in a small, dim chamber at Kimbolton, a room so cold the walls wept with condensation, a room stripped of carpets, tapestries, servants, warmth. The queen who once commanded Europe now slept on a narrow bed wrapped in furs that did little to hold out the icy drafts. Yet, even as her body failed,
Her mind remained sharper than any blade Henry VIII ever wielded. Those who saw her in those last days wrote that she was pale, tired, sickened by years of grief and isolation, and yet unmistakably regal. Her posture is straight, her eyes are steady, her voice is quiet but unwavering. This is the part history loves to sanitize. Catherine did not die defeated. She died undefeated. But power wins nothing in a body collapsing from neglect. Breath by breath, hour by hour, Catherine slipped away. Doctors begged her to rest. Priests urged her to surrender her bitterness. Ladies in waiting wept by the door, helpless. Catherine asked for one thing alone: bring me Mary. The request that Henry VIII never granted. He denied a dying mother the sight of her own child. He denied Mary the chance to say goodbye. He denied both of them the closure they deserved. A king afraid of a queen who no longer held any physical power, yet whose moral power he had never conquered. So Catherine wrote a letter instead, a letter to Henry, not begging, not apologizing, not softening. A letter soaked in grace, dignity, and a mercy Henry did not deserve. I forgive you all, she wrote. I pray to God to pardon you. I have loved you and always shall. Even in death she reminded him who she was, a queen formed by the Catholic monarchs, a woman raised for duty, a daughter of Spain whose mercy was stronger than Henry's tyranny. But hidden beneath the gentleness lies a truth historians rarely acknowledge. The letter was not submitted. It was judgment, a spiritual verdict delivered by the woman he tried and failed to break. Catherine died on January 7th, 1536, with a crucifix in her hands and the resolve of a queen carved into her final breath. When news reached Henry, he dressed in yellow, a color that in Spain signified mourning, but in England appeared like celebration. He held a joust. He smiled too widely. He hid whatever emotion gnawed at him behind theatrical gestures. Because what does a man do when the only person who ever defied him without fear is gone? What does a king do when the woman he exiled refuses to die as anything less than royal? Henry had won the political war. He had taken the crown, the court, the marriage, the narrative. But Catherine had won the moral war, the spiritual war, the historical war. Anne Boleyn would fall 4 months later. Anne, whose entire rise depended on Catherine's destruction, would follow her into the grave, proof that the new queen could never replace the old one. And Mary, the daughter Catherine fought for, prayed for, starved for, would become England's first crowned queen in her own right. Catherine's legacy was not erased. It simply took 20 years to rise. This is the truth that Tudor propaganda tried to bury. Catherine of Aragon survived Henry VIII, because Catherine of Aragon was never Henry's subject, never Henry's property, never Henry's creation. She belonged to Spain, to God, to history. And history remembers dignity longer than it remembers kings. So now the question passes to you. In a world where power bends truth, where kings rewrite stories to justify their desires, where the loudest voices drown out the most righteous ones, what does it mean that Catherine's defiance outlived Henry's anger? What does it say about survival, about justice, about the cost of standing your ground even when the world demands you fall? Was Catherine stubborn, or was she heroic? Was she foolish, or was she the only one brave enough to face Henry VIII without bowing? 500 years later, the verdict is no longer the king's, it's yours. If this story shook you, moved you, or made you see Catherine of Aragon with new eyes, share your thoughts in the comments and subscribe to Hidden Crowns for more truths the Tudor world tried desperately to silence.